The dust of Arizona clung to everything, the air, the horses, even the man's tired soul. Jake Harlow, a rugged cowboy known across the frontier for his cold fairness, never imagined that one trade at a cattle auction would shatter the quiet rhythm of his life. That morning, he'd come to collect on a debt from a man named Carter Briggs, a desperate rancher who had nothing left but a few rusted tools, a dying horse, and a young Apache woman bound in chains. "She's strong," Carter muttered, unable to meet Jake's eyes. "Work for you better than any hand I got. Take her, and we're square." Jake's jaw tightened. He didn't trade in people. He wasn't that kind of man. But when he saw the girl, barefoot, bruised, and silent, something in her stare pierced him. Her eyes, dark and deep as the canyon at dusk, were not the eyes of a servant. They were proud, defiant, ancient. Against his better judgment, Jake accepted. He freed her shackles the moment he got home, and she didn't thank him. She didn't speak at all. She simply walked to the edge of the corral and looked toward the red mountains as though they were calling her by name. "You can stay till you're ready," he said quietly, setting down a blanket and food near the barn. Still, she didn't move. He thought maybe she didn't understand English, until that night, when a thunderstorm rolled across the plains and she finally spoke. "You shouldn't have brought me here, cowboy," she said, her voice calm but edged like a blade. "They will come for me." Jake frowned. "Who?" he asked, but she only looked back toward the mountains, lightning reflecting in her eyes. She refused to eat, refused to rest inside. She worked silently through the day, mending fences and carrying hay as if trying to repay a debt he hadn't asked for. Her name, he eventually learned, was Ayanna, and though she said little, every word she spoke felt like it carried the weight of something sacred. Days turned to weeks, and Jake began to notice strange things. At night, he'd see her standing under the moon, whispering in Apache, a low chant that seemed to calm the wind itself. His horses, once restless, stood still when she sang. The coyotes that prowled near the fences no longer came close. Once, he saw her place her hand on a dying calf, and by morning, the creature was standing again. He tried to ask her how, but she'd only said, "The earth listens to those who belong to it." One evening, he caught her gazing toward the hills again, a look of sorrow on her face. "You miss your people," Jake said softly. She didn't answer for a long while. "My people think I'm dead," she finally whispered. "They burned the camp where I was taken. My father." Her voice cracked, and she turned away. Jake didn't push further, but the way she said father lingered in his mind. There was something different in her, an unspoken dignity that didn't fit the life of a captive. That night, Jake dreamed of fire, of warriors on horseback, of drums echoing through the valley, of a man with feathers in his hair shouting her name. He woke drenched in sweat, the scent of smoke still in the air. When he stepped outside, he found Ayanna kneeling in the dirt, her hands pressed to the ground, tears streaking her cheeks. "They're coming," she whispered. "My father's spirit has found me." Jake didn't know what to believe. He thought she meant a search party or a raid, but when dawn came, he saw riders approaching, dozens of them, painted in red and white, moving like ghosts through the dust. His stomach dropped. The Apache. Ayanna stood tall, her face unreadable. She turned to him and said softly, "You showed me kindness when others showed chains. Do not raise your gun today." The riders stopped at the edge of his property. Their leader, an older man with fierce eyes and a chest draped in eagle feathers, dismounted. Jake could tell from the way the others looked at him, this was someone powerful. He spoke in Apache first, and Ayanna answered in the same tongue. Then she turned to Jake and said in English, "This is my father, Chief Nayati." The world seemed to tilt beneath Jake's boots. The woman he'd accepted as a slave, was a chief's daughter. The chief stepped closer, his gaze like fire. "White man," he said slowly, "you bought my blood." The men behind him shifted their spears, but Ayanna raised her hand. "He did not buy me," she said firmly. "He freed me." The chief studied Jake's face for a long, unbearable silence. Then he nodded once. "Then he will live." But Jake knew this wasn't over. The look in the chief's eyes wasn't just gratitude, it was warning. Something larger than both of them was unfolding, and before the sun set again, Jake would learn that freeing Ayanna had tied his fate to a bloodline that could shake the frontier itself. The air that morning was thick with tension. The Apache riders circled Jake's ranch like spirits risen from the red earth, their faces painted in patterns that seemed older than the desert itself. Chief Nayati stood motionless, his weathered gaze locked on Jake, while Ayanna stood between them, her dark hair whipping in the wind. You have crossed into a storm, cowboy, the chief finally said, his voice deep and steady. When a man accepts what is not his to take, he carries its curse or its blessing. Jake swallowed hard, his hand twitching near his belt though his revolver remained holstered. I didn't take her, he said quietly. I saved her. Niate's sharp eyes softened for a brief second, as if he recognized a truth in the cowboy's words. Still, he raised his hand and motioned for his warriors to lower their spears. Then you will come with us, the chief said. To the mountains. There is a debt that must be understood by the spirits themselves. Jake looked to Ayanna, searching for meaning, but she only nodded. You must come, she whispered. If you don't, they'll think you stole me. He didn't hesitate. He saddled his horse and followed them into the mountains, leaving behind the ranch that had been his only home. The journey was brutal. The desert stretched endlessly, the sun burning their backs as they climbed higher into the crimson cliffs. Jake rode in silence beside Ayanna, trying to understand how his life had turned from quiet survival to something out of legend. He noticed how the Apache warriors treated her, not as a captive, but as a leader. They bowed their heads when she passed, listened when she spoke. It became clear, she wasn't just the chief's daughter. She was something more, something sacred among them. When they reached the high valley at dusk, Jake saw a great fire blazing, its smoke spiraling into the sky like a message to the gods. Around it, the tribe gathered in silence, faces lit by the flickering glow. Chief Niate stood before the fire and spoke words in his tongue, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. Ayanna stepped forward and knelt, touching her forehead to the ground. Then she turned to Jake and translated softly, he calls upon the ancestors to witness. He will ask if your spirit is true. Jake frowned. And if they say no? Ayanna's eyes glimmered in the firelight. Then they will take your life, cowboy. Despite the chill that ran through him, Jake stood tall. Then I'll speak my truth, he said. The chief approached and drew a circle in the dirt around Jake's feet, sprinkling sacred herbs that burned with blue smoke. The tribe began to chant, the rhythm deep and haunting. Jake felt the air change, the fire's glow pulsed like a heartbeat. He tried to steady himself, but the world began to spin. Shadows twisted, and in the flames he saw faces, warriors, women, a young Ayanna as a child laughing by a river, then screaming as soldiers raided her village. He saw her captured, chained, beaten. And then, he saw himself. Not as he was, but as if he had lived 1,000 lives before, always standing at the edge of a desert, always reaching out to her. When the vision faded, Jake fell to his knees, gasping. Ayanna's voice broke through the chanting. The spirits have spoken, she said, her tone trembling between awe and fear. They say your soul is tied to mine. The chief's face turned unreadable, but he raised his hands to silence the tribe. So be it, he said. The earth has chosen. That night, they gave Jake a place near the fire. No one spoke to him, yet no one harmed him either. He watched Ayanna move through the tribe like moonlight, graceful and commanding. She wasn't a slave, not a prisoner, she was their future. But what did it mean that their spirits were tied? He didn't dare ask until later, when they stood alone by the river. The moon reflected off the water like silver glass. What did you see in the fire? She asked softly. Jake hesitated. You, he admitted, your people, pain, but also something, older. Like I've known you before. Ayanna nodded slowly. The fire never lies. My grandmother said the spirits weave our paths long before we walk them. She touched the scar on her wrist where the chains once bound her. You didn't just save me, Jake. You freed a bond that was broken generations ago. Before he could respond, a sudden cry rang out from the cliffs. The warriors leapt to their feet, grabbing their weapons. A scout rushed into the camp, shouting in Apache. Jake caught only fragments of words, soldiers, guns, approaching. The chief's eyes flared. The White Army, Ayanna translated. They followed my trail. They think your ranch was a rebel camp. Jake's heart pounded. He knew what that meant. Blood, fire, war. The soldiers wouldn't listen, wouldn't care about who was innocent. He turned to Ayanna. We have to get your people out of here. But the chief was already shouting orders, preparing his warriors to fight. Ayanna stepped closer to Jake, her voice trembling. You don't understand. This was meant to happen. The spirits brought you here for this moment. The night erupted in chaos as distant gunfire echoed across the canyon. The flames danced higher, painting the rocks red. Jake realized the truth. This wasn't just a battle for land. It was a reckoning, And the choice he made at that auction was about to decide the fate of an entire tribe.